brother just told me.
Jay, why are we laughing so much?
How many years, John?
I started teaching Hamlet when Lyndon Johnson was president.
And she says, I met the youthful Lord Paris at Lawrence's cell and gave him what becoming love I might, not overstepping the bounds of modesty.
No, I already did that with the
I
other
should
guy.
say that.
One of the great things about teaching books like this is that you have to sort of come to grips with the fact that it's beyond you.
Him and Beowulf and...
But you know, when he dies, he's like desperate to be remembered. Tell my story. Remember me. Remember. All right, Jay, good to see you again today.
What's going on, Paul?
Should we be doing this? Should we stop right now?
No.
All right. Hi, Jay. How are you doing this evening?
Yeah, we're good. Chugging along. I actually just started the Odyssey. We're on book 4 with my freshmen.
Yeah, no kidding.
So yeah, so they're chugging along, and some really good. One class just wrote their first little paper, and we're chugging along. It's good.
All right.
It's good to be back home.
Yeah, you got them. You got them on board. You got them on board yet, or not quite?
Yeah,
yet?
it's a mix. I have one class that's really into it, and the other class it's a little more of a sales pitch, but they're doing well.
Yeah. Oh, that's good to hear. And hey, if you're just joining us, we're Paul and Jay. This is Teacher Talk podcast. Two teachers get together and talk through great books and pedagogy, how to present them in class and sell them to students, to draw them in for their own benefit. We reassure them. So if you're a teacher or involved in selecting books for students in any kind of a setting, homeschool groups or anything like that, we love to have you on board. So follow us. You can follow us on YouTube or podcast platforms, wherever. And I would love to have you subscribe and like our work here and follow us and interact, in the comments as well. So we are almost actually right in the middle of the Odyssey, not just metaphorically in the middle of covering the Odyssey, but we're on book 11. So this is book 11 of the Odyssey, one of the most fun books in a very fun text. So we want to walk through it in sort of our normal breakdown, do an overview, and then focus in on maybe three big parts, and then give a nice little wrap up there in the end. But before we do, Jay, do you have a poem for us?
All right, so I'm cheating. I have two not long poems.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the fascinating things about book 11 is the tension regarding different perceptions of war and the meaning of war. So I picked two very different war poems. One's very famous and one less so. So the very famous war poem is by Rupert Brooke, who fought for the English forces in World War One. Sadly died right at the tail end of the war, mosquito bite. But his poetry largely was sort of heroic and idealistic. So one of my favorite poems of him, simply called "The Soldier," kind of imagines if I die, what meaning could there be in my heroic death in war? And it's really beautiful. So I'll read "The Soldier," and then I have one other one that offers a very different sort of mental approach to serving. The Soldier. If I should die, think only this of me, that there's some corner of a foreign field that is forever England. There shall be in that rich earth a richer dust concealed, a dust whom England bore, shaped, made aware, gave once her flowers to love, her ways to roam, a body of England's, breathing English air, washed by the rivers, blessed by the suns of home. And think this heart, all evil shed away, a pulse in the eternal mind, no less gives somewhere back the thoughts by England given, her sights and sounds, dreams happy as her day, and laughter, learnt of friends, and gentleness in hearts at peace, under an English heaven. That's in any sort of pantheon of World War One poetry. You have, various ones by Wilfred Owen, Rupert Brooke. So this is one of the greatest. It's really gorgeous, right? So one of my favorite contemporary poems is a guy whose family, he's from Louisiana, but his family's from Trinidad, and his name is Yusef. I was wondering if I'd shared this. I don't.
I don't think
I
so.
don't.
Can you say the name again? I was getting some weird feedback on that audio there.
The name is
from you.
Yusef Kulmenyakaa,
Okay.
and he's a professor of literature at Princeton and NYU. But what's interesting about him, he's a Bronze Star recipient. He served in the Vietnam War, for the American forces. He's born in Louisiana. And this poem imagines not so much theoretically like heroism in war or what could my legacy be in war. This is actually a moment when a soldier witnesses someone jumping on a hot grenade to save his fellow battalion's lives. And if you could it's a prose poem. The rhythms are really interesting. It has one of the most amazing closing moments of a poem that I know. And it just kind of walks you through the frenetic panic of just seeing something that extraordinary, seeing a man literally knowingly sacrifice himself in that way. And then at the end, the poem shifts to imagining like why the speaker is constantly haunted by this man. And it isn't like an anti-war poem, and it's not really a pro-war poem. It's just it's a moment, right? So it's called Grenade. It's called Grenade. And I couldn't recommend more strongly to people. Go hear Yusef Kulmenyakaa read it, because he also has one of those like Morgan Freeman-ish kind of voices. So it's great. It's phenomenal.
Okay.
So this is Grenade by Yusef Kulmenyakaa. There is no rehearsal to turn flesh into dust so quickly. A hair trigger, a cocked hammer in the brain, a split second between a man and infamy. It lands on the ground. A few soldiers duck, and the others are caught in a half run, and one throws himself down on the grenade. All the watches stop. A flash, smoke, silence. The sound fills the whole day. Flesh and earth fall into the eyes and mouths of the men. A scream trapped in midair. They touch their legs and arms, their groins, ears, and noses, saying, "What happened?" Some are crying. Others are laughing. Some are almost dancing. Someone tried to put the dead man back together. He just dove on the damn thing, sir. A flash, smoke, silence. The day blown apart. For those who can walk away, what is their burden? Shreds of flesh and bloody rags gathered up and stuffed into a bag. Each breath belongs to him. Each song, each curse, every prayer is his. Your body doesn't belong to your mind and soul. Who are you? Do you remember the man left in the jungle? The others who owe their lives to this phantom, do they feel like you? Would his loved ones remember him if that little park or statue erected in his name didn't exist? And does it enlarge their lives? You wish he'd lie down in that closed coffin and not wander the streets or enter your bedroom at midnight. The woman you love, she'll never understand. Who would? You remember what he used to say, if you give a kite too much string, it'll break free. That unselfish certainty. But you can't remember when you began to live his unspoken dreams.
Wow. And that's Grenade. And we'll put a link. We'll put a link to this poem. And Yusef reads on YouTube. You can find him read.
Oh man,
audio file.
It's so good. So good. So I just thought, in light of the complexity of this chapter, I would present two very different kinds of war poems.
Yes.
So,
how do you summarize? What's the difference between them? How do they strike you? What are the two big differences?
I think the Rupert Brooke is the sort of reflection that, I would imagine any soldier in that sort of scenario needs to occasionally entertain in order to stay sane and in order to continue with the mission, that there's a greater thing than me at play here. And if, God forbid, if anything were to happen to me, that some part of who I am in my homeland lives on.
Yes.
And I also think, Yusef Kulmenyakaa just takes a snapshot moment and then just kind of reflects on the meaning of moments of heroism, both the actual heroism of it and the ineffability of it. There's nothing to say. How do we make sense of this? And even how it haunts you later. And we're about to read different characters who are haunted by their memories, mainly war memories. So I just thought that it would make sense to read a sort of contemporary iteration of that.
Yeah, I like that. It does span. It spans the spectrum of war experience. The first one, the soldier, Rupert Burke poem, is very patriotic. I think it sounded to me like the best of patriotism, where he's talking about the land that gave him life and breath and fed him and grew him, and him giving back and returning back to it a richer piece of earth,
a richer dust concealed, like. The dust of a foreign country where my body will be richer because an English corpse will lie in it.
And that corpse was made and grown and developed, cultivated in every way in England. So it's England, richly England. Mm-hmm. So it's patriotic, and that in the best sense of patriotism. And then this other poem, Grenade, is psychological. This personal, intensely personal interior experience of what it means to, in a way, jump on a grenade, but more fully to see someone do that and live the rest of your life with that sound ringing in your ears. And you're right. This chapter it spans that same gap. We meet very, very personal people who have personal beefs down in the underworld that they're nursing their own personal psychological experience. But there is this bigger, this grander perspective of the story that's being told, as well. So I think it kind of works. It works in that sense. Yeah, those were good, Jay. Thank you, and thanks for introducing us to new poets, new poems, pathways to go down. I thought our last episode's poem was great. I went back and read that again. Hilda Doolittle. I didn't know anything about her, and that poem was just amazing. But these two poets you brought to the table here today are great as well. So we'll put links in the episode notes down here so you can find them and expand your own knowledge of good poetry that's out there. So so it's a good thing to do. And Jay, you open your classes this way too, don't you? Do you? I do.
Do you open classes? And this is a weird tangent. So I have a very talented guitarist. He's going to Berkeley next year. And we're doing Paradise Lost with seniors. And I've been obsessed with Willie Nelson's son, Lucas Nelson. And he covers Willie Nelson's Angel Falling Too Close to the Ground, which is one of the most beautiful songs. And he's incredible. So for Willie's 90th birthday, Lucas just comes out by himself and it's so beautiful. And I sort of lamely connected it to Paradise Lost. But the fact of the matter is, at the end of class, I just wanted to play a good song. But it stemmed out of a conversation from before class. That's what we're talking about, which is there's a lot of really great poetry and fiction and music, and there's a lot of garbage. As you and I have talked about, there was 99% of Victorian novels out of print. So the fact that there's Dickens and George Eliot and the Brontes, that's what survived. But the nice thing about contemporary poetry, for example, or music, is we can be a part of that process of delineating no, this is worth it and this isn't. And that's kind of exciting, I think.
Yes. It is. And I kind of want to speak about that. It's part of one of my final points that I have in mind for today. The lingering question part is our participation in this. I want to make a stab at a connection. We'll see if you like this sort of interpretive connection I want to make to the ostensible subject matter of chapter 11. There are lots of subjects, lots of topics in here, however you want to split it. I guess lots of characters, too. Lots of things that happen. We are in the underworld. We are in Hades, Erebos, the land of the dead. What are the other words connected with this? Where are we?
Well, I think the important thing, I say to my students is unless they have a knowledge of mythology, you can't equate it with hell. This is the receptacle for where all the dead people go. It's like Sheol in the Old Testament, right? It's just, that's the place for dead people. And I think that's just important because noble, good people are there. Like Odysseus's mom hasn't done anything, right? She's there.
Right.
And all kinds of people are there.
Yes.
But anyway, do you want to work on a summary, a quick overview?
Yeah, let's do that. So it is the land of the dead, and it's a reminder that, instead of going to, Wikipedia or Google to find out basically, how Greek mythology works, it takes a little longer, but you understand it better, much more fully, if you come to what are Greek biblical texts, essentially, and this is one of them. So if you want to know how the land of the dead works, what it's like after death, I don't know of a better place you can go than chapter 11 and hear Homer,
Yep.
the theologian, if you want to put it that way, the poet of Greek religion, give us a fairly authoritative account of it. There's some mechanical aspects of how you get there, how you were able to get around while you're there. If you want to see your dead mother sitting over in the corner crying and you'd like to speak with her, Tiresias can tell you how to make that happen. And so there's sort of mechanical information about that, and then there are also accounts of what it's like to be there. So it's it's intense in that way. Well, when we left off in 10, Odysseus was eager, finally had kind of woken back up and was eager to leave Circe, to leave Kirke and get back home again. And she says, to do that, to get the information you need to get back home, you need to go to the underworld, and this is how you do it. She gives them instructions on how to get there, and you kind of sail there a little bit. And so they set Odysseus and the men set sail, and they perform this pagan ritual, a rather dark blood ritual, that also involves a pouring out of a drink offering, and of pouring blood into a pit, and you can open up an opening into the underworld. And Odysseus has learned that Tiresias, the prophet of the house of Atreus, the blind prophet who can see the future, knows, essentially, I think that means he knows what the gods know, at least at some level. If he can get in the underground and find in the underworld and find him and talk to Tiresias, Tiresias can tell him how to get home. While he's there, while Odysseus is there, he runs into a vast array of people, and they're divided up somewhat interestingly. I'd like to talk about that a little bit, too. The groupings are curious, and so we get this review of classical mythology, and at one point, the narrative pops back out, and we're reminded that Odysseus is telling this story to an audience, and so you can't help thinking, yes, you can't help thinking that these guys are on the edge of their seat, hearing the details about some of the greatest characters that had been alive during their lifetime, all the way back to the greats that would have been sung about by any poet, who would sing to them. So this is like an amazing story around the fire with someone who's been all around the world and talked to and known or seen or come into contact with all the great people. So it's an exciting storytelling. So there's that. And while he's there, Odysseus gets apparently, and we'll talk about this more, the information that he's there to get. He gets some really sad interactions with some people he had been close to, including his mother, who he didn't know wasn't dead when he left. And then also with people he had fought with in Troy. And then things seem to go a little sideways, and he decides he's got to get out of there and get out of there fast. And so he runs back to the ship. They jump on ship, and he says, let's go, hoof it out of here. And he and his men row away. And that's sort of the opening of the scene. There's tons and tons, and then curtains close. That's the end of the scene. That's the end of the book. They're running back to the land of the living when the book closes. So that's sort of the overall 30,000 foot frame up there.
Yeah, I mean, I just did book 3 with one of my freshman classes, and Telemachus, as we remember in book 3, is tasked to go to 2 places, Pylos and Sparta, to talk to friends of his father to get information about his father's current situation, if there is any. He gets nothing about his father from book 3. So my journal question for my students to write about is, what's it doing there? I think you can make a case that, like, the point of Odysseus going to Hades is to figure out how to get home, what's getting home look like. That's like a percent of book 11, which should make us ask the other question, which is, if the point of the plot of book 11 is a tiny fragment of book 11, what's it doing there?
Yes.
I mean,
Totally
and
agree.
the democracy of book 11 is fascinating. His family, his mother, he talks to his mother, you know, he was dead. The drunk comrade who fell off the roof at Xerxes' palace, war heroes, kings. And then there's a typical, like, Homeric, there's like a catalog of famous women, a catalog of famous men.
Right.
So it's really incredible. And I think, well, we can get into this, but a question that I think would be important is, what would this do to anybody? I mean, forget Odysseus. Like, you think of Hamlet in Act 1, he sees the ghost of his father, who he obviously never thought he would interact with. Like, what would that do to him?
Yeah.
I think it's so easy to read these things like it's a work of literature. Okay, ghosts, fine, or, you know, Scrooge, whatever the ghost story is. This is a man who saw lots of corpses and caused a lot of corpses, but this is different. I mean, this adds a layer to his life experience that would make him a different human being from this day on. And I think that conversation is like really, really important.
It's huge. And his mother says, I mean, he's talking to his dead mother. You talk about just the shock or the psychological experience of meaningful experience of this. That's enormous. But his mother says kind of the thing you're saying. He says, after you're here, don't forget to don't forget to tell Penelope all about this. Don't forget to tell her about your experience here. This is the shocking, life defining experience that you had. And his mother takes a moment to remind him of that, like your mom does, like grab a jacket before you leave kind of thing. Don't forget to tell her about this. This is a big deal.
What about
son.
Paul? What effect would it have if, I mean, God forbid, if this was us, we didn't know our mother died. We get to talk to the ghost of our mother, who then says, "You want to know how I died? I died because I missed you so much." Can you fathom a more painful conversation? I mean, so aside from the ghosts of comrades,
enormous. Yeah,
his mother said that to him.
Enormously painful. I always read that, Jay. I don't know if you read it, if you read it this way, but I told classes that she killed herself. I said, you don't, and it doesn't say that, but you don't literally die from
That's
missing
really
someone.
interesting.
You know, you don't literally die. Like what organ fails from missing someone? You know,
that's good.
I take it as a read of she let herself die or killed herself, but it doesn't take away from it. Only
whatever.
Yeah, right. You quit. You just give up. And his dad has done a version of that, but it just emphasizes the point that you make, which is it's a horrifying detail. And his mother might have spared him that, but she didn't. Said, since you were gone and never came back home, and I thought you'd never come back home, I died. I died from missing you. You were so great. I couldn't live without you. Yeah, it's like the old that. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's like the old joke about the son calling the mother, and the son says, "How you been?" She goes, "I haven't eaten in 8 days." And he says, 8 days? Why not? She goes, "Well, I didn't want my hands full in case you called." I mean, to say this to your kid, I mean, it's too late. It's interesting. It's almost like, now in her case, she knows she has limited time to say anything to her son. What does it say about their relationship that's what she says? I don't know. I find that really interesting.
Yeah. I thought on the one hand, it reflects well on him. It gives us, again, as we're trying to find out who Odysseus is, one of the ways that you find out about characters in books is by their testimonies, what people say of them. They're not always true, and they're certainly not always complete, but it adds to the story. His mother said he was so awesome to have around that when he wasn't around, it was horrible. Life wasn't worth living. So you could take it as a, as a character reference, on what it was like to live and grow up with Odysseus. That's, that's one piece of it. But there is that other side of it that almost sounds like it's not buried too far beneath the line that he shouldn't have left. He shouldn't have left his family, and he should have gotten back home. Maybe, I don't know if she blames him or blames the gods. I don't know, but he should have been at home, and that gets driven home even further, when we meet Telemachus and they get back together, because there's a similar sadness there. But anyway, it's a great point. So yeah, there are long lists of people he meets, but there are some stars: Achilles, Agamemnon. I'd say the other most intense interaction, I think, is Agamemnon, whom he served under not that long ago. And I think, and we kind of mentioned this, but we could touch on it again. Agamemnon's story is an important parallel story throughout throughout the book, so that gets reiterated.
The book's haunted by it.
It's haunted.
The whole epic is haunted by it.
Odysseus's return home is haunted by it. So those are implied from I think to this point it's 3 or 4 times we've heard Agamemnon's story of how he came home and it was an utter disaster.
I think it's more than that. I'm on book 4 with my guys, and we've heard it at least that number of times. Okay. I noticed something this year that I never noticed. I didn't pay attention before. Aegisthus kills Agamemnon and rules for 7 years. So
really?
It begs the question, do these people look at Agamemnon and say, okay, he's not coming home, but he's also the guy who slaughtered his daughter? I don't know, maybe this guy, and he was allowed to rule for 7 years, and it took Orestes to come and avenge his father. Maybe he would have had a 25-year happy rule, and he was actually better.
Yeah.
Agamemnon doesn't come off well in the Iliad. I mean, he's kind of
Agamemnon's mother is not pining away for his return. You get the impression, she's not in the underworld.
So the whole danger of that story haunting the poem, and just the constant reminder of returning home for these guys isn't automatically safe. And you don't have to go back far in American history to know that returning home for soldiers isn't always safe. That's psychologically safe, literally physically safe, family-wise safe. And I don't know, something about Homer knows that.
Yeah, home, exactly. I mean, home has to be regained. Home it's not static. It doesn't live like in a Hallmark film or something. Yeah, it has to be reestablished. You have to re-enter it. As the person you are now, which you weren't. When you left. It's a great detail. On the theme of things I never noticed before, Agamemnon asks him, have you noticed this? Agamemnon asks him if he has any information about his own son. He said, my wife killed me before allowing me to see my son again when I returned home. Do you have any information? And he asks him, maybe he's gone to Pylos, or maybe he's gone to Sparta to talk to, just like Telemachus does. He asks, I never noticed that. He says specifically, did he go and talk to the king of Pylos? Did he go and talk to the king of Sparta? Maybe he's with Helen. I don't know. It was a weird detail. And Odysseus says,
I'm not sure. I know that there is, just like Helen leaving with Paris in some sources is an abduction, and in some sources she's tap dancing with him. Yeah. And I know in with Aegisthus and Clytemnestra, it's similar. And in the poem, fate, Clytemnestra resists him for a while, and fate basically forces them together. So it's not really her choosing it in a way. Maybe he's at boarding school. No, maybe he's not old enough to matter. Maybe he's away with family because dad's not there and she's not Penelope. And who knows? Yeah. That's a really interesting gap. Yeah. But he's obviously held up as a model for Telemachus. This is what avenging your father and protecting your mother looks like.
Right. That's what waking up, taking responsibility, becoming a man, being who you're supposed to be, looks like, and you'll be sung of, and be famous. That's what Athena holds out to him to remember.
So, what's your obvious passage, Paul?
I'm sorry.
What's your obvious passage?
Yeah. Well, my obvious point here, excuse me, is, where did I write those down? There it is. Well, here's the obvious thing, and there's several little places in this, and I think if you're taking a class or students through this, you should do this at some level. Which is, the obvious thing is, this is how death works. This is how the underworld works. This is what it looks like. I think you should take that from book 11. Its relationship to the broader story, I don't know. We'll talk about that. It's unusual. It's not what Kirke says it's going to be. He does not learn from Tiresias how to get home. I mentioned this in the last episode, actually, as one of my big lingering questions. And your question, Jay, why is he there? What is the point of that? all that's another question. But to the point of, just interestingly, how did the Greeks understand death? There are several key passages, here where you can get a picture of it. I think one, the idea that people are spirits or are shades in the underworld. They're insubstantial. What is burned on the funeral pyre? I think it's Odysseus's mother says there's no sinews, there's no muscles here in the underworld. What the dead are eager for, frantic for, is blood, which sounds creepy, like vampires or something, but it kind of makes sense as well. The blood is what makes the body living and live and vital, and so that's what they want. It's like echoes. I read it as echoes of a former self they wish they were. Certainly Achilles says that explicitly. So the blood is like a symbol of that, and also the essential part of the body. So the underworld, they're shades, they're shadows. Odysseus tries to hug his mother, who, upon drinking the blood, will, as Tiresias tells him, tell you the truth. Tiresias says, anyone you allow to drink the blood here will answer your questions and tell you the truth. So that seems to be another rule, or another mechanical aspect of the underworld. So they want that, but they're still insubstantial. You won't be able to have that last tearful embrace, with a person in the underworld. Agamemnon is clearly miserable. Achilles, this is where we get that line, I would rather be a slave, right? A farmer.
Yeah, that's my obvious point, that one.
Okay, I'll let you talk about that, but that's also more about what it's like to be here, and Achilles articulates it. So I would start with that. One of the obvious big things. It's confusing, but it's an obvious thing. Don't miss it. Land on it. Spend some time and allow your students to explore it and ask questions, because some things don't make sense. Like, well, I mean, yeah, even if you're playing along, that, for instance, Odysseus can ward shades off with his sword. He's like, back from the well. How does that work? Your sword, apparently would go right through them, but he does do that. But so there's plenty of questions to ask, and it's fun to sort of wander around through it and get a picture, get a sense of how this was portrayed. At least to start with. What did you have then for obvious and important?
I think one of the most revolutionary moments in Homer, both of his epics, is the Achilles interaction. And I spent a lot of time on this with students, because if you don't read the Iliad with them, they need to know a little bit of who Achilles is, because as we know, he is the person who's not fighting in the Iliad. He's swift-footed Achilles, who's basically whining in a tent for most of the poem, not moving his feet.
That's Brad Pitt, right? Is that
Achilles is pretty much Brad Pitt. No, that's fine. Classicists loathe the movie Troy. It's hysterical.
It's not great.
If you want to just keep a classicist up at night, just say, have you seen Troy? But, everybody, including Odysseus, is begging him to fight, because if Achilles is fighting, you're going to win. And 9 years ago, he's not fighting. His friend Patroclus says, okay, well, let me wear your armor so I can scare people at least. Patroclus, his best friend, gets killed. Achilles goes on a murderous rampage. But Achilles' whole existence, his mother's a goddess and his father's a king. He's meant to be immortal on some level, but she dipped him in the river Styx and held him by the ankle. We know that story. There's a lot of, even when he was walking around, lots of mythology about him. And he made the choice to die heroically rather than to live a long life. He made that choice because of this culture's value of kleos, or glory. That's how you really get to live substantially forever in the mouths of poets, because you're a hero. Mm-hmm. So I think the core ethic of the Iliad is that sort of martial heroism that leads you to glory. That's the pulse of the Iliad. And I think the Odyssey's response to that in a really complex way is in book 11. So in the Emily Wilson, it's like 474. Achilles says, Achilles recognizes Odysseus and spoke in tears. My lord Odysseus, you fox, what will you think of next? How could you bear to come down to Hades, numb, dead people live here, the shades of poor, exhausted mortals. So Odysseus says, the obvious thing, would come right out of the Iliad. Achilles, greatest of Greek heroes, I came down here to meet Tiresias in case he had advice for my return to rocky Ithaca. I've not even reached Greece, let alone my homeland. I've had bad luck. But no one's luck was ever better than yours. So he tells Achilles the truth. In the Iliad, Achilles says to Odysseus, there's nobody I hate more than a guy who says one thing but means another or does another, which is Odysseus. Like he's saying, I hate you without realizing it.
Right.
Like Odysseus tells the truth there and says, no one's luck was ever better than yours, nor will ever be. In your life, we Greeks respected you as we do gods. And now that you are here, you have great power among the dead. Achilles, you should not be bitter at your death. And this is the famous line. Achilles replies, you must not comfort me for death. I would prefer to be a workman hired by a poor man on a peasant farm than rule as king of all the dead. But here's the thing that I recently noticed. So in some respects, that sounds like the Odyssey's response to the Iliad.
Okay.
Yes, the price of war could be glory, but it also is a ghostly life of sorrow and regret, no matter what. That this sucks compared to walking around on Earth. So much so that I'd rather be somebody's property tilling the fields than be the king of everybody down here. But here's the weird thing. He asks about his son, and Odysseus tells him, and Achilles, and on a couple of pages later, like 538, says, after I told him this, so Achilles' ghost, Odysseus says, took great swift-footed strides across the fields, delighted to have heard about the glorious prowess of his son. So I love mentioning that because even in the heart of the ghost of Achilles, if ghosts have hearts, there's conflict. He's aware of the hollowness of the ghostly life in Hades, no matter how heroic or not heroic you are, but can't help to want his son to be the hero, even though a heroic life ultimately gets you nothing. So Achilles comes off as a really complicated, somewhat self-contradictory cat here, I think.
It's wild. But there's nothing. Does Achilles see? I mean, he's obviously miserable. So there is, in the underworld, he wants to be alive, but to be alive and to simply live, to endure, would also be miserable. You get the sense, right? Because of the ethic, as you're saying, of the Iliad, and in the Odyssey. I mean, I think Odysseus is bragging in the storytelling that he's telling here about the glory of wars, is to die on the is to die on the battlefield. I mean, Odysseus does bring a different version of a glorious life in this book, and maybe that's what you mean by the Odyssey's answer to the Iliad.
Well, I think the Odyssey has a more clear-eyed version of life, and particularly the heroic military life, because it's multifaceted. There's heroism, and the other side of heroism is the sorrow of a ghost and having to hang out with the Elpenors of the world, because Hades doesn't care if you're a hero. You're right next to Elpenor who gets drunk and falls off a roof.
The Elpenors of the world. Yeah, there's a good T-shirt slogan in there somewhere.
I think the Odyssey is a progression of the Iliad, and it has a lot more nuanced approach to the complexity of heroism, that it's not, die heroically or heroic. It's almost like the two poems I started with. You can imagine Rupert Brooke's battalion losing Rupert Brooke, and someone just writing a poem being haunted by seeing Rupert Brooke on his deathbed. It's not like one's right. It's just thinking has continued.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, okay, Kleos, heroism, glory, fine. What does that look like? What are the sort of tensions inside it? And I think that's what Book 11 digs into, that the Iliad doesn't in the same exact way. I shouldn't say, I don't want to like whitewash the Iliad and say it's one thing. The Iliad's also complicated, but I think with this question, you can't get a starker difference, a different opinion about all these significant issues than what Achilles just said. But then he kind of contradicts himself, asking, was my kid like, even though I'm miserable, is my kid like me?
Yes.
So that's really interesting.
It is really interesting. Yeah, it's difficult to read the wrath of Achilles and read, the choice that he makes, the life choice that he makes, not as, the Iliad is subtle, but not as kind of the big perspective of it. But
Yeah.
if that were the only perspective, then Odysseus in the underworld gets the worst news ever, which
Yep.
is that he's going to live to be an old man and die peacefully in a mist,
Yeah.
nowhere near battlefield. And if all there was glory from the battlefield, then that would be the last thing you'd want to hear. And
Yep.
Odysseus, I mean, I don't know what his response is to that. I don't think we're given that exactly, but he does give, he does get that. And as you say, even from Achilles' perspective, who, if anyone, would benefit from or glory in the choice that they made, it would be Achilles, the
Yep.
greatest warrior on the battlefield ever.
Yep.
He is clearly taking no solace in having achieved that fame and glory
Right.
here now. It's not enough. It's
No.
definitely not enough. But it's true. There's a
And it's what
conflict.
they have, Paul. It's what they have.
Yeah.
What else is?
What do you
not
mean?
like
The
a
glory?
Messiah. Not.
Sorry. What is what they have?
The hope of being remembered in the stories of poets.
Yeah.
You're going to be in Hades. It doesn't matter. Mothers there, slaves are going to go there, kings and queens are going to go there, drunk people off of roofs are going to go there. That's where the receptacle for. That's where you go. Provided that you get a burial, you're going to have a ghostly existence in Hades.
Yes.
Okay. So then what?
Right. Right. And it is, there is a tension. There is the tension there. And we feel it, and it's easy. I think it's easy to connect students to that, to that now. You feel this, people feel the desire for some ambition for being remembered. At the same time, you can ask the same question, why? Why would I do that? In the end, what's it what's it worth? And is it worth giving my life to or not? What is worth giving my life to? And it's very difficult. It's very difficult to answer that question. So in that sense, it's true. It's a true representation of the tension, and doesn't whitewash life and death and make easy answers to those tough questions. So that's really good. I also want to say, because I almost forgot too, I like the connection you made back to Hamlet, because one of the other things that's related to this underworld thing is to how it works and what it means to a person's life, is just the phenomenon of this underworld that writers use, and the fact that Shakespeare, coming so much later, bumping right up against modernity and modern novels, includes something that seems so old-fashioned, like to have ghosts, in his, I think, extremely modern play of Hamlet, where seeing ghosts is a central part of the story. Harkens back to this, and harkens back to the question of the meaningfulness of it and the importance of it. And we've talked about that, as listeners to our podcast know, and you can go back and find, I can't remember what we said, but I'm sure it was insightful. About Hamlet, Hamlet's dad, and the role in that play. But it brings me back to the question, which I'll ask here, here at the end, which is about the meaning of this, which you brought up. Why are we here? What role does this play? What role does it play in the story? So, all right. So that's the obvious part, and you're saying focus on the Achilles scene in particular here. And I think it's a good point.
I just think Odysseus's value system, I think he has somewhat a fluid value system. Odysseus's value is survive the moment and do anything I can, lie, cheat, steal, whatever. That's Odysseus's core value. But as a part of his culture, kleos, or the hope for glory, is just in their DNA. And suddenly, the thing they've all cared about, the thing that probably kept them going in the war for 10 years, you have someone who they know is heroic looking at them and saying, it's just not what you think. So this is one of those moments in great literature where a character has to confront an uncomfortable truth. Then what? So that's part of the future of our reading, is like, what does he do with that? And we don't know now. Like, that's fine. We're going to see.
We'll see. We'll see what he makes of it. And the only thing I would add to that is I don't see him as, I know what you're saying by this wily, man who just gets by and always wins or succeeds. But I think there's more, like one of the intensities from the chapter, and ostensibly the reason he's there, is because he has another goal, which is to get back home, to set home in order, and to not die, in the process of doing that, as we're constantly reminded Agamemnon, who did it wrong and was a terrible person,
Yeah.
did. And so there is that side, of Odysseus. He's not simply just trying to sleep around and gather gold and silver and
Yeah.
go back home and just, it's not Iago, just
Right.
burning his way through the plot. There is a carefulness, an intensity that you can see scene for scene, even the Cyclops scene or whatever, where he's very careful. And as he gets back home, he's going to be intensely careful, almost, maddeningly restrained. It's maddening. It's going to be maddening to Telemachus. We'll hear Telemachus say. So that is, and that's something too. And I hadn't really thought about it in the way you presented it, but in the values of the Odyssey, that's broadening beyond simply glory on the battlefield, which can seem a little meatheady. There is something about this, the Kleos thing, the glory of getting back home and setting things in order, which is a moral thing to do, a morally responsible thing to do.
I just think because of his circumstances, he can't afford to have a core ethic. His core ethic has to be survival in order to get home and set things in order. I think he has to be a moral chameleon to do everything he can to survive these ridiculous circumstances that he's in because of his fault, frankly.
Yes.
I mean, he's only in this conundrum. We're not done. Like, you and I could be drinking bourbon and just talking now.
Yeah.
But the only reason we're not drinking bourbon and talking now is because he released his name in book 9 to a Cyclops because he couldn't imagine not being known for his acts of cleverness.
Yeah.
If he didn't care about Kleos, we would be just chatting right now casually. That's why this is going on. He couldn't help himself. This is the pre-book 11 Odysseus. Post-book 11 Odysseus, my opinion, if the Cyclops chapter happens after the Hades chapter, he just gets the hell out.
Yeah.
He doesn't say, "Oh, I'm Odysseus, sacker of cities, kid." He gives like all of his credit. Here's my resume. I like long walks on the beach. I live in Ithaca. My dad is Laertes. He doesn't do that.
Yeah.
He's still latched on to Iliad mode. But now, really interesting to imagine what Odyssey mode is post Hades.
Yeah. And that's not, I haven't thought of doing it, but I wonder if you could track that, after. We can track track his actions and his attitude after. You probably could. And you're right, to that, Tiresias opens with that. When he meets Tiresias, he says, "Well, since Poseidon wants you dead," and that sort of frames up the advice that Tiresias gives him. Well, that's and that would move me, if you're ready to move on to the, like subtle, not so we did the sort of obvious, important, subtle but crucial sort of point, and I've got this point of what Tiresias actually tells him. What Odysseus finds out. Is that different than sort of the route you're going, Jay?
I have a very tiny passage that's about a silence, actually. So that's, I'm not dealing with Tiresias at all.
Okay. So if in this you have to go, so as there's so much in here to sift through, but you have to go to the Tiresias scene, obviously, because that's ostensibly why he is here. In the Fitzgerald translation, it's page 188. It's lines 120 and following, or 110 and following, and Odysseus, and he tells him some interesting things. Now, whenever I read the story, I thought he was going to the underworld to get essentially directions. This was sort of Google Maps, and he was going to get a list. Take a left by the old tree that fell 30 years ago, and up there where the barn burned down, you're going to take a right. Sort of things. There's nothing like that. There's nothing close. And actually, we are going to get directions like that in the next book. And it's not from the underworld. Not Tiresias is going to be back in Kyrgyz. He can tell him how to get home. Like, keep the land on your right, as you go past the cliffs or something. But here, this is what he gets. And you have to, I think you have to, first of all, focus on it, and then also ask yourself, why was this important for Odysseus to have this? I mean, I want to take the book seriously. I want to take it. I want to take seriously, and Odysseus seriously, or believe them. In other words, that this is something that he needed to have in order to get back home. If you do that, if you bind yourself in that way, then you've got some work to do to explain to students, to bring them on board, to understand yourself. Because Tiresias tells him, he says, "But anguish lies ahead. for you, great captain. The God who thunders on land prepares it, not to be shaken from your track, implacable in rancor for the son whose eyes you blinded. Back to the
Yep.
Cyclops thing. And one narrow strait you may go through. When you make landfall in Thranica first and quit the violet sea, dark on the land, you'll find the grazing herds of Helios. So he does say on one thing, you're going to run into the cattle of Lord Helios, the sun. Avoid them. So this will take some personal denial, some personal restraint and we'll see that scene that's coming up. And he says, though you survive alone, bereft of all companions, lost for years, under a strange sail, you shall come home to find your own house filled with trouble, insolent men eating your livestock as they court your lady. You shall make those men atone in blood. But after you deal out death, however it is you go about doing that, go overland on foot. All right, and here it is.
Yep.
Take an oar until one day you come to where men have lived with meat unsalted, never known the sea, nor seen sea-going ships with crimson bows, and oars that fledge light hulls for dipping flight. The spot will be plain to you, and I can tell you how you'll know when you've gone far enough. When someone passes by you and looks at you with the oar on your shoulder and says, "Hey, what do you do with that fan on your shoulder?" Right there. Stop. Plant the oar in the ground and make a sacrifice to Lord Poseidon. A boar, a buck, turn back, carry out pure hecatombs at home to all wide heaven's lords and undying gods, each in order. Then a sea-born death, soft as this hand of mist, will come upon you when you are wearied out with rich old age. Your country folk and blessed peace around you, and all this shall be just as I foretell. Boom. That's the end of your life. So he sees how to get. But so that's a strange way of answering the question. Tiresias, you can see the future. How do I get home from here? I'm stuck. I've been out, almost 20 years. How do I get back home? And he says, you're going to make it alone under strange sail. Everyone else is going to die. You get that? Information. Your house is going to be a wreck. You'll put that in order. I don't know how you're going to do it. Whatever you do, make them pay. But then when that's done, this scene, I take it to mean that you are meant to, it's almost like a missionary journey he's sent on. He is like the Mormons. He's meant to go door to door for 2 years or 3 years, how long they do that, and spread the word.
I'm imagining Odysseus with a clip-on tie and a white button-down shirt.
Yeah, exactly.
Fabulous.
Exactly.
Oh,
that's what he's doing. He's going on mission. And he's going to go out where no one has heard the name of Poseidon before. They don't know about this god, and he's going to make a monument to Poseidon. And when he's done that, he can go back home. Poseidon's anger will be thereby alleviated, and he'll die. He'll die in old age, and it says at sea. Interestingly.
Yeah.
And that's kind of it. So that's what he finds out. So again, to sort of build up your work, I think as a teacher, if you choose to take on this mission, is to think about that. Think about that with your students. Say, wow, he did all this. Odysseus did all this, performed this ritual, risked going to the underworld and death, which most people don't come back from. When you're in the land of the dead. And if we're building off of this Tiresias thing, what do you have?
Well, I know the Achilles business gets a lot of ink. But I'm fascinated by the conversation with Ajax, who not only is a famous household cleaner, Paul, but was,
right before
he had the cleanest floors in all of ancient Greece. No, he was known as this incredibly gigantic, huge, strong, amazing warrior, right?
Yeah.
So they call him a tower. And Odysseus tries to engage, and the two lines in the Emily Wilson are, he did not answer.
Yeah.
He went off and followed the spirits of the dead to Erebus. So I think that's another side of the war experience that you and I know enough people who serve to know this also is very true. My mother's husband did 3 tours in Vietnam, and he's on days that celebrate veterans, he goes quiet.
Yeah.
And that's not everybody. Everybody has their own reaction to their war experience. There's the best modern book on this is Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried. And in that, He has a
Yeah.
piece called "How to Tell a True War Story," and I just want to share like a little tiny bit because it speaks to the Ajax silence, and I think so much that lives inside of Homer is universal and timeless. And I think here's an example: we're talking Vietnam, we're talking 3,000 years before Vietnam, all the same thing. Uh, Tim O'Brien, the narrator's talking about like how can you tell the moral of a true war story,
Yeah.
and he says, in a true war story, if there's a moral at all, it's like the thread that makes the cloth. You can't tease it out. You can't extract the meaning without unraveling the deeper meaning. And in the
Yeah.
end, really, there's nothing much to say about a true war story except maybe, oh, true
Mm.
war stories don't generalize. They don't indulge in abstraction or analysis. For example, war is hell. As a moral declaration, the old truism seems perfectly true, and yet it abstracts because it generalizes. I can't believe it with my stomach. Nothing turns inside. It comes down to gut instinct. A true war story, if truly told, makes the stomach believe.
Mm.
And I think that's a lot of the Iliad, right? And
Yeah.
I think Ajax's silence is true for him.
Yeah.
That's a true response to someone just trying to benignly engage you, not being mean. So I just think that's incredibly powerful. And I know that like many veterans respond not just to the Achilles thing, but to Ajax's lack of response. I
Yeah.
mean, I think there are certain transcendent moments in life where people say, "How was that?" And you're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Birth of a child, like, yeah, try to make sense of that. The loss of a parent, yeah, try to make. But
Mm.
war, I think, is its own peculiar thing, and I just find that really powerful. So that's my subtle but
Yeah.
essential passage.
I like that, and Odysseus can't get him off of it. Even in the underworld, this one chance for them to to talk or to make up, and Ajax remains silent. And Odysseus calls him, don't hold a grudge, let this thing go.
Yep.
The thing that happened between them, which we know from the from the Iliad, and you can look up and add that in to your telling of this or not. It runs deep, runs deep for Ajax. Maybe he blames Odysseus for him even being there, for Ajax being dead and being there as well. But yeah, it is a good representation of that, of someone's experience in war too, which
Yeah.
which is a good perspective to take on this.
Yeah. So we have lingering questions.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'll pick one, but what's yours, Paul?
Well, I got kind of a cheat for this lingering question because I introduced my lingering question last time, and it is, what is the, well, in general, it's this, and I think this is something that could be a research paper topic for your students to do, that would a lot of students would get into. But is what is the whole meaning of going to the underworld, in classical mythology, and maybe across stories too, stories where there are ghosts or where dead people show up. You can take it even from a Christian perspective. I was teaching Sunday school, Jay, and we were doing the Apostles' Creed, and there's a line in the Apostles' Creed.
Dead.
Yeah, Jesus died. He descended into hell. And I have known a former pastor I had, when the church would come to that, he was the pastor of the church. When they would come to that part of the creed, he would just close his mouth, would not say those words because he did not believe it. It was too much for him to.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
pre Holy Saturday when that happened, hell was Hades. It was the receptacle where everybody was.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Yeah.
So I know it's theological. I don't know the controversy, but it's theologically, controversial, and I don't know what that means either in a very specific way. I think I know sort of generally, the Christian theological, a Christian theological meaning of that. So there's a lot to deal with this. But what I want to roll out, Jay, is I have this great insight, and I would like to give. This is like a world historical moment. My interpretation of the meaning of going. Of what it means to go to the underworld, and you can see what you think of this. I don't know, but one thing that kind of makes sense of it is, why would Odysseus go here? When you see this parade of people, and there are these all-stars, these greats of Greek history who he runs into, I think an interesting reading of this is to say this is like an encounter. This is an encounter with a tradition. This is an encounter with the past. This is Odysseus not consulting, not consulting the fact world of how to get home, but the wisdom world of how to get home. If you want to understand yourself and understand your life, where you are likely to be going, I think you and I would say this in our humanities class. We would say you should consult the dead.
Yeah.
Our access to the dead is Homer is the dead. Shakespeare is the dead. The greats of history, the accounts of their lives can be conjured through a bit of magic, through books to some degree. That's a little thin, but it's our pathway back into it. And I think it does take sacrifice of time and effort. And I like this idea. I thought of this. Okay, well, what's the sort of blood ritual part of it if I'm doing this kind of analogy? And I think it is bringing you have to bring as much and as deep of your humanity to these historical sources, to these books of literature, and try to set aside, the ideology, try to set aside your, sharp theology, and bring, the culmination of all those things together to the dead to find out. And if you bring your blood to the dead, they will tell the truth to you. I like that, that's sort of a line that Tiresias says. And then in a way, as best we can, you can see the future. You can see what's likely to happen for you. What is a path of wisdom? So I guess the one way to read it that's interesting to try to put together is this is a consultation of where wisdom can be found, and it is among the dead.
Yeah.
Of all kinds, as you point out, people who've lived all kinds of lives can tell us stories of the meaning of life, and how to be back home get back home in the most meaningful sense. So I kind of like that reading of of it. I don't know. I'll throw it out there. But that's my lingering question is, this is something I've been working on for years, purposefully not really looking up answers to, but trying to just learn more and more and more about mythology and about this story in order to come up with it. And I guess I was struck, last thing I'll say, I was just struck with what is Odysseus's impulse to go to the land of the dead? Is it a cheat? Is it another trick where he's trying to find out information he shouldn't have? Or is there something legitimate and well, I guess I'll just say that, more legitimate about it. And I guess I fell to the legitimate side, that he's going there to find out something really important, and that those interviews with those people who just happen to be there, that he's not ostensibly there to hear, is the important part of the story, that he talks to them and hears them. So I don't know. I'm going to throw that out there as maybe a teaser for a way to think about and to try to work your way through this this weird part of the book. Yeah.
Yeah, mine's connected. Mine is considering this complicated and shocking adventure, in which Odysseus interacts with his military commander, who's had this terrible, ridiculous tragedy, his own mother, who says the terrible thing to him, a variety of heroes who have a variety of responses and attitudes.
Yeah.
It isn't a consistent message. There is wisdom in the chapter. It's just multifaceted and inconsistent. They all think very different things and have very different feelings.
That's right.
They're different. I mean, they're not the same. Mm-hmm. So my question would be, for the rest of the poem, Odysseus bears the weight of this experience. And I ask students, like, if you were Odysseus, what particular moment or piece of information gleaned in this chapter would stay with you the most, do you think? There's no right answer. There's no way of knowing, but it gets students to think about, okay, I'm a kid. If I interacted with the ghost of my mother, or if I interacted with a comrade, so that's my question is, he's going to bear the weight of this. What's that going to look like? How is Odysseus characters who see ghosts and dead people are never the same after? That's a self-evident thing. That's right. Like a trope in literature, and the trope, I think, is invented here.
Yeah, it may well be.
So it'd be interesting, if you're reading this, pay attention right away in the next chapter. How's Odysseus different? Is he different?
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
that'd be interesting because I think that whether he's different or not is helpful information to how to read him because he's one of the most elusive characters in the history of literature to read. He's not simple. He's very
Yeah.
complicated because
Yeah.
there's not one thing.
He isn't. He's skilled in all ways of contending, as we're told in the introduction.
Yeah.
He That's a very good point, and it is something I want to look for because, as I said, I haven't done before, and I would like to bear that in mind. I don't think this is explicitly referenced by Odysseus ever again in the rest of the book. So it's not like he brings it back up.
No, we're
so
looking
you
at
have to try to
behavior and
work it out.
choices. We're looking at behavior and choices.
That's right.
He doesn't say, "Hey, have I told you about Hades?" It's really, he doesn't say that.
Yeah.
I think Homer's too subtle for that.
Yeah, no,
You know?
exactly. But it's more like what you mentioned. Is there another moment where he dangerously, pridefully, rips his shirt off and boasts, in front of the Cyclops,
Right.
that sort of thing.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
No, that's good. No, that's good. I think we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah. I think so. There's so much. There's so much more in here. But I think the things that we talked about are great places to center, to focus on as you take on book 11 from this. It is sort of a pullout. It is the middle. It's almost the dead center of the book. So if you're interested in that, that death in the underworld is at the center of this story. And then we're going to get right back into the plot. There is that little moment in this chapter where we're reminded that he's telling the story. It pulls back out to the Phaeacian court, and so that that's going to get picked back up, but only after we go back and say goodbye to Kirke. So that's so that's upcoming. No, these are good things. These are good things, and we hope that this is an inducement to more people to read it and to take it on. Take on teaching and drawing other students in your sort of circle of influence into this book, into this an interview with a dead person, Homer.
Yeah, right.
So, all right. Is that it,
Thanks,
Jay?
Paul.
Is that enough?
I think we're good.
Okay. Hey,
thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks again. We'll see you next time with book 12.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.